Hello, guys. If you didn't guess, that was the new. No, it's definitely not the new theme music. That was my poor attempt at trying to replicate the improvement season music. But anyway, welcome back to the improvement season podcast. It is me, Mike Challis, and on the other end, Steve Hall. How's it going, Steve?
That intro. Oh man, if people didn't hear the outro that you did, I don't even know if it was last week, but when I asked you to do it the other time, I think that was the episode that just came out, which for the listeners, this is recorded on the 6th of March, but it won't come out the next Monday. It will come out the Monday after that because we're just so far ahead with recordings, which is good because I will be away in a few weeks' time because I'm going to be on holiday, which you've already spoken about, so I won't bore people about that. But actually, Dom, if you're listening, I imagine you might be, and we mentioned Dom, who liked the intro music, and I think outro as well. It comes in and out, and he actually found the person that, like, he found the music. So I haven't looked into downloading it and whatever, but I might be able to get that back. Or alternatively, I will find a new little jingle. I didn't realize the podcast, like the improvement season, been going for like 8 years or something absolutely
8
mad.
years.
Yeah, I think maybe that long. Someone will have to correct me, but yeah, I think it might have been going that long. It's certainly 7, maybe 8. So it's just mad. So that jingle has been going almost the entire time, if not the entire time. So it's obviously going to
Wow.
feel a bit weird. And so yeah, hearing you go, bow, wow, 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 it's a nowhere close, by the way. But anyway, yes,
It's
I'm here. I'm good. I just actually random, but I'm just going to say this because it feels newsworthy to some very small extent. I just ate a little New York cheesecake that was like high protein. I can't remember the exact calories. It's slightly under 200, 11 grams of protein, so it's not super high. I bought them because I just saw them and I'm like, whoa, those sound good. And like I loved New York cheesecake when we were in New York. So I was like, oh,
mm,
at some point I'll have that. I realized I just kept, I don't know for whatever reason, if I don't know if you do this, Mike, but I bought something thinking, yeah, I'd want that and that will be good. But I just put it off, put it off, put it off. And the use by date was like yesterday. So I was like, oh man, I better actually eat this. I just ate it. It's like the tiniest, for those watching, it's the tiniest little pot. So it's like a little goo type thing, but it
mm.
was really nice, honestly.
Okay.
Like it, if you told me it wasn't high protein and it was just a New York cheesecake, I'd just think, yeah, it was a New York cheesecake. It was
Mm.
nice. So anyway, that's top of mind.
Well, really interesting you said that because I walk past it every week in Lidl and I didn't buy it yet because I think, hey, I'm getting, you know, more than sufficient with like, Greek yogurt and protein powder and stuff. And I just haven't quite, I thought, is it going to be worth it? Because do they do like a tiramisu type one
I've
as
tried that
well?
too.
Any good?
That was disappointing for me.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
Cheesecake is good though.
I enjoyed the cheesecake quite more than I was expecting to. Yeah, so I would,
Mm,
if people are interested in that, I would. At the moment, I'm still, and the reason I've been putting off having it is like a lot of my quote unquote treats, like the way I uh, eat food in off season is I don't kind of have like free meals or cheap meals or whatever. I just like incorporate a little bit on a daily basis or whenever I feel like, kind of following that 80% at least wholesome, minimally processed food. Tons of fruit and veg. I actually looked at how much fruit and veg I was having a day, and I think I was getting like 10 portions. Did we talk about that?
yeah.
Yeah, when we met up, I was like, how the hell am I getting in 10? That's crazy. But they just add up. And so, yeah, some of my like treaty foods are protein rich. So, like, rather than having a Mars bar, it will be a Mars protein bar. So, like, rather than having a cheesecake, I'll have this like protein enriched cheesecake. So, or I have my Ninja Creamy at night rather than having
Mm.
ice cream. I'm just not at that point. Man, I look back at a full day of eating from my last off season, and it was on a Friday, which tends to be my takeaway day. And I just looked at what I was eating. I was like, Steve, how did your that's so far from how I'm eating now. Like you look at if people saw the way I was eating now, it's like again, virtually all of it's wholesome, minimally processed, loads of fruit and veg. Whereas I looked at my diet that day and I was just like, oh wow, food gets like I just ate like cereal and like milkshakes and orange juice. I had some fruit and veg in there, but not close to what I'm having now. And then we had a Domino's, of course, in the evening. So yeah, it was just funny watching that and being like, man, I don't want to be there though, because I also don't like being that low of an appetite. Anyway, I'm rambling. But hopefully that
Well,
gave you some idea of where I'm at.
yeah, for sure. Do you know what? When we spoke about it, I was like, oh man, I think I'm okay, but I need to up my game. I need to up my game. Like Steve's so good. But it will be really interesting coming back to kind of not wanting to be there because with how things are moving at a kind of relatively steady pace for you at the moment, I imagine it's going to be such a it's not like it's going to happen overnight, and it's something that will be hopefully a gradual process, and maybe even something that you could nip in the bud. It will never get to the extent that it's gotten to in the past, which hopefully will be nice for you.
Yeah, I hope so, because I know that I know I've said it, and I feel so far removed from it because obviously it's been a long time. But I know I've said, like, when I'm in that zone of force feeding, it's worse than the depths of contest prep. And I've pushed through it, and I know I refuse to push through it now. I don't think it's wise either. I think if you were to look at like my blood work and maybe some of my like longer term HbA1c, like long term like glucose and insulin sensitivity and stuff, it'll probably not be in the best place. So I just know when I'm starting to like, it's sort of similar to like when you feel injuries creeping up, or if you feel
Mm,
like you're going to have to deload soon. Sometimes if you can nip it in the bud before you hit that wall, it's better. Or once you hit it, then you just deload. Like I know last time I mini cut, I think I literally was sat in front of my breakfast and I was getting like hot sweats like eating it, and it took me like 2 hours
seriously.
to eat it. Yeah, it's so weird. I get such a weird physiological response. That day I was just like, I'm mini cutting. Like this is, I just start today. And I get to the point where I can't eat oats and stuff like that, which seems crazy to me now.
Mm,
Like, so yeah, I'm like I keep saying, whilst I'm still in a position where my appetite is like I could still eat much more than I'm eating, and I'm having pretty like it's palatable to some extent, like it's enjoyable, and I can still enjoy social meals out and things. I'm nowhere near that end, but I'd much prefer to be here, holding myself back a little bit, kind of not, yeah, letting my, I guess, want to eat more get ahead of me and
mm,
take control. So anyway, we've talked about that before, but I'm still in that position. I thought I'd basically recovered from it, but actually it's prolonged. Like I thought I had some respite, but it feels like it's still there. And on that note, we talked about me incorporating a refeed. I actually just dropped it. I used it that 1 week, and then it did the job. I guess it pushed my body weight up, but my weights just continued to climb at a
ah,
pace right now that's faster than I would like. I think it will settle off again, but it's
mm,
so interesting looking at my like scale weights and like how it's like I get some growth spurts and then it like plateaus, and then I think that's something when you are trying to gain a little more slowly, you have to accept that there's going to be periods of time that it might be like a month at maintenance, but then the next month you might gain double what you intended for that month, but it's kind of on average over 2 months is where you want it to be. I think I'm just getting to grips with that. I'm much better with clients, but when I'm doing it with myself, I think, especially in the position I'm in now, being self-coached, sometimes you can just, yeah, make the decision you want to make from like,
mm,
I don't know, what's it called? Just agreed perspective, really, at that point. And yeah, I cut that back, and so yeah, my calories are actually they kind of had moved up to maybe an average of just over 3,300, and now I've chopped them back down, so they're near 3,200. I know it's only 100 calories. People are thinking, come on, like you can't even be that precise with your nutrition, but and I think there's a point there. But if I'm as imprecise with 3.3 and I'm at 3.2, I know it's like a clear reduction. Also, my day-to-day eating is pretty similar. But
mm.
anyway, I'm still in this transitional recovery period, like to some extent, I think. And I think at some point, it either it will really, really level off, or it will just be you have to accept this is kind of not a new normal, but this might be at least the start of your mass phase, and that might be a fine and normal position to be in. It's not like I'm dieting.
Mm. What are your scores at the moment in terms of libido, energy levels, etc.?
So I'd say everything's completely back to baseline,
Okay.
apart from my energy levels, and like I feel pretty trashed, but that's training.
Mm,
If I was to deload, I know my energy levels would be back up, my sleep would be a little bit better, but I'm grinding through my 14th week of training now. So it's 15 weeks since stepping off stage. So it's been a long time. And I'm hoping I might be able to milk it out until I go away to the Maldives. And then that can be a true like life deload in many ways. and I think it will end up going that way. I haven't got any joint pain, niggles, performance is still holding or improving. I haven't dropped any performance, and like again, hunger, I thought had really like got to a better place. It's definitely better, but it's still like there. Food focus is still. It felt like it was up at like a 3 or 4 out of 5, 5 being normal, and it feels like it's maybe dropped a little bit here. And then libido is definitely not where it can get to. And libido is such an interesting one because I wonder if it will creep up when I've got the time for it, if that makes sense. When your session's like getting towards 2 hours, you're working all day, you're fatigued, it's quite hard to have much of a libido at that point. And also off the back of prep, it's just not been routine. Like that prep was the first time I got true blue balls, which is actually a true like medical term where I can't specifically, but it's the build up of, you know, semen or whatever, and it causes discomfort. And it's a healthy, normal thing to regularly like ejaculate and clean the pipes to some extent. And so I'd never got to the point where I'd abstained from any of that for so long till this prep. And so, yeah, it's like, it's not a habit. Like, and I think it becomes a little bit habitual to some extent, for me at least, during an off season. So yeah, anyway, like I said, that's definitely not where it has been, but I think there's multiple reasons for that. I am interested. This brings me back to a point. I'm looking at getting some blood work done. I just need to take the time to sort it all out. There's this company called Thriver that does a different method to the finger prick, or even, Ada's just farted. Stinks. She's on my lap for those who can't, well, you can't see her. Oh my
Silent
God.
but violent.
Ada, man. I was just like, what is that smell? That's definitely her fart. Sorry. Yeah, Thriver. I think they can get, they don't use the finger prick, which has loads of limitations. And they use, I don't know if it's like capillarized blood, or they use a different technique, but you can do it on your own. You don't have to get someone to come and do it. Way more convenient if you can just do this thing yourself and send it off and get those results back. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to hopefully find some time this weekend to look into that and get it. Because I think if I get it and it gives me like, I would expect my testosterone to be low, but in the normal range. If it's outside of the normal range and quite outside, it'll give me a kick up the arse to just be like, hey, Steve, just eat a bit more. And that's partly why, whilst my rate of gain is maybe a little fast on average over the past week still to what I want it to be eventually in my off season, I'm fine with that, because I'm like, I know I'm still recovering. So you might look at it and be like, yo, you should probably pull back 200, maybe 300 calories. But I'm like, I'm just going to pull back 100 because it's not worth prolonging the recovery phase if I am still kind of in the mix of that. So yeah, anyway, big old ramble. I'm still getting there. I'm mostly happy with everything, though. In particular, performance in the gym is really, really good.
Yeah, and kind of like what we've spoken about in the past, where at some point down the road, the lines will intersect. It's just at what stage do you want that to happen? And there's going to be pros and cons to either strategy that you use. And it's just about accepting which are you most comfortable with at this moment in time. I guess the only tricky thing that comes to mind when thinking about the blood analysis is that you haven't got previous data necessarily. So it's a bit of a one-off measurement, would you say?
Yeah, with testosterone, it's always a bit tricky because of the one-off measurement. But I know, like, I don't think it is, because I know I should be in the normal range. Like,
yeah,
that just should be there. Like, if I'm not in the, like, that's what I want to see. I don't care if I'm low normal, high normal, like where I am. So long as I'm in that range, I'm happy. If I'm outside of the range, it doesn't matter if, like, that shouldn't be where I'm at. And I know, having done blood work years ago at this point, I was in the normal range in my, like, off-season phases. Okay. So, like, I was low normal, but I was there. So I know I should be able to be back there. Yeah, so I don't think that's a problem per se. The interesting thing is a lot of the kind of numbers that are found in terms of what is a healthy range are based off I think it's the capillarized blood is what they use, and it's not based off that blood work. It's based off other, like, intravenous. I don't know if that would be the term. So I don't know if it's as, like, you can black and, like, just use those numbers directly. Again, I haven't looked into it a ton, just like looked into it a short bit, but yeah, I think it will be worthwhile to just get that, because it's funny, someone asked, have you had blood work done? they were like, I really think it's a good idea to get it like pre-prep and post-prep. And I'm like, to some extent, yes, but what can't your biomarkers kind of tell you? And so I'm kind of always skeptical of the need for naturals to do blood work, because there's a lot you can just intuit in some extent. And I know there's some things under the hood that you might not be able to tell. But and so I do think like once a year isn't a bad idea. I don't think it's necessary though. Plenty of
Mm,
people are fine without doing that. But yeah, I don't think you need to necessarily get like it done pre-prep and then get your blood work back and get those numbers back to pre-prep numbers. I don't think it quite works like that. And
no.
people have spoken about your recovery from prep sometimes takes half the length of the prep itself. And my prep was like, what, over 30 weeks. So it's kind of like, it's getting to that point, I guess, close to half the
Mm,
time. I don't know if you can remember how long it, like I said, I said this to clients, I say this to clients. It's so funny going through it as well, because I say this to clients all the time where I'm like, you think you're in a good spot, but wait for another 2 weeks down the line and you'll be like, oh, this is like, I feel like I'm back to normal. And then 2 weeks later, you're like, oh no, this is normal, and you're like, oh no, this is normal. It's an interesting time to say the least.
definitely. And do you know what? It's so funny because um, if you'd have asked me in the moment, I would have said, "Yeah, I'm recovered," and I probably thought I was recovered. But there are certain things in the way that I act in the clinic right now, and I just think, man, I'm so different now to how I was back then, which make that, and I can't put my finger on it, but I think the biggest thing for me is just my social interaction, I would say, and just my kind of general calmness and comfortability with things. Whereas, whereas before I was just less socially bubbly, I would have said, and I can only there, and it's just little things like that, which is hard for me to describe, but there's very subtle nuances where I'm like, man, I didn't know how maybe under recovered or how bad I was, sort of speak, in the moment, and I can only see that now based off of how I'm behaving, and some of that might also be just general, maturing as well, knowing more, getting better at regulating and managing myself as well, potentially, and the lessons that I've learned. There might be an element of that as well, but yeah, I definitely think you just don't. I think sometimes it's so hard to truly know when you're in it, and you can only know looking back.
Yeah, hindsight's 2020, they say, isn't it?
Totally. And
So I totally relate to that.
I was just trying to look through my recovery meso. So I think it was week 13. So I think I got to 13 weeks. So you've surpassed me now.
Yeah, I'm at the point though. Yeah, a lot of things are maintaining now, and I think we talked about it last week where I said like even maintaining performance almost feels harder than slightly gaining performance, and I think it's just because you're butting heads with that adaptation and fatigue is accumulating. So yeah, it still feels productive, and I'm still motivated to train. But I'm definitely at a point, especially if I didn't have the Maldives in a few weeks, I would be thinking about backing off soon. Just because I think you can also get to a point within training where there's no objective signs that you have to pull back, like your performance hasn't gone down, but
Mm,
how much is it taking to maintain that performance? And if
mhm,
now your leg day is taking an hour longer because you need more rest, suddenly it's maybe the juice isn't worth the squeeze at that point. I just had the discussion with a client just this week, actually, where I was just like, hey, dude, we can grow working way less kind of quote unquote hard if we were to back off now and reduce this fatigue. Whereas if we keep kind of grinding away, one, we're increasing potentially injury risk, but also increasing the length of time that we now need to back off. And like it's just you're going through hell for what it's just not necessary to grow. So let's just pull it back at this stage. So
mm.
yeah, that's sometimes you have to butt heads with it to know, but yeah, that's a discussion we've had. How's everything going on your end now? Obviously, last week you said you're in a really nice position with kind of the kind of deplete, replete in terms of
Yeah.
diet days and then refeed days.
And do you know what? Still in that sweet spot, I would say. Just it feels super manageable right now. Like I don't feel, I would say, again, before we took that kind of 4 day kind of refeed break, as it were, I would say like, oh, I'm starting to notice diet fatigue symptoms. But since that time, I felt that everything's been super manageable. Yeah, kind of, I get a bit of diet fatigue symptoms towards the tail end of the week, but as soon as kind of the weekend and that first refeed hits, I'm like, boom, good to go. And then again, the week's super manageable again. So the severity and the kind of the heightening of the diet fatigue symptoms almost feels slightly less now, just because there's that nice, like you said, deplete, replete kind of cycle going on. And it's almost like my body knows that it's coming in a way, which sounds quite weird. What's he doing now?
It's just stinky. Like,
Well, at least you know it's just farts. That's the main thing.
now she thinks there's some fun going down, but no, this is
Yeah.
not going to be fun.
Oh.
Oh man, so that's great. I think I know we are, however, like I think it's easy to make it sound more positive than it is. Like we know you're
Sure.
still dieting. Like
Yeah.
this isn't like it's just a breeze. Like you need
No.
those refeed days
Oh,
to keep it
totally.
sustainable. And I'm pretty certain. I don't know how things have gone like since we checked in, obviously this week, but rate of loss slowed down quite a bit. So we're kind of hoping for a whoosh. And I think to use kind of my experience of what I was going through in terms of is the juice worth the squeeze. We are getting to that point of your diet where it's like, man, if we to make this diet somewhat sustainable, we have to lose at such a pace. Is it really worth continuing to get leaner for what? So I think we're soon going to be transitioning out of the diet at least, which I think is it's been a while that you've been dieting though since New York. So you're coming to 15 weeks, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's really easy to keep track because we're so aligned
Yeah.
with what you know with our schedules. But no, you're absolutely right, and I didn't mean to sort of what's the word like gloss over it too much because definitely I need that refeed. I would say by Saturday. It's not like oh I'm fine. It's like no right Saturday or Friday. It's like right this is needed kind of thing. And if that wasn't there, you're right. I probably would be fine for 1 week, but it would catch up with me the next week. And onto the it's just at this point now, like the whoosh hasn't happened yet. Um, so kind of it's like it's probably there somewhere, but it's just like, hey, when is it going to happen? We will wait and see. But
Yeah.
I would say that also mentally mentally it's like I'm ready to start a gaining phase, not because I'm finding the diet hard, but I want to start sort of progressing and working towards building muscle mass now. And now I just feel like, hey, like these how much time is you know 2 pounds gonna give me, in reality, it'll probably give me a bit of time, but not like months and months potentially. So versus actually right, hey, just get stuck in and start gaining and gain. So because particularly I think it's again when I see yourself and I see like again like people like Rob as well, who's like looking awesome at the moment. It's like kind of like I'd love to be having that positive building momentum again now.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, this is a topic I want to do a whole podcast on because I got asked the question of like, how do you not overeat during a gaining phase, basically, which is such an interesting question. Like when you think about it, because the what's the word I'm looking for? You think if there's a time to overeat, it's going to be when you're dieting because your hunger's higher.
Mm.
But people, in my experience, are so much better at locking in and adhering during a diet than they are during a gaining phase. It's so much easier to just eat another 100 calories during a gaining phase. And I think it's like a mentality switch. And a number of people reached out to me and were like, I'd love a whole podcast on that. So we're not going to do that now.
Mm.
But I don't know if I'll do even maybe a solo episode on the Revive Stronger podcast. Or maybe we can talk about it here. I have to have a think about what I want to do there. But it's definitely one that I don't know. Do you see that too with some of the people you've been working with now, where it's like a lot of them find it easy to overdo their food during a gaining period?
Yeah, there's just no like there's a couple of clients that spring to mind at the moment, and it's just where they talk about I'm going to be dialed in, locked in, kind of when we start that kind of fat loss phase, and I'm like, that's so interesting, and why aren't you like not that you need to be completely contest prep mode all the time, but equally it's like like you said, there's a mentality switch clearly where they feel that they can afford to be lax now, and
Yeah,
but dieting, it's like, no, they're not going to be lax.
it's
It's
that
very interesting.
complacency.
And like I mentioned it, but on a post, but I think it's like, complacency is the killer of progress, and it's a silent killer as well, because you don't know it's coming, and and often you're unaware it's there, and it's only when something happens or someone points it out to you, or you look back in hindsight and you think, man, I got complacent, damn.
Creeps up.
Yeah. And yeah, it really is a killer, and you've got to work so hard to stay self-aware, or to have people in your corner to stop it from creeping in.
Without this podcast turning into
Yeah.
that podcast, I'll hold us there. But I think there's just so many thoughts that come to mind as we talk through this subject, which I think that will be a really, really valuable episode. Anything else on your end? Did you see any of the Arnold results? Did that interest you at all?
I didn't. Do you know what? I missed the Arnold, but I saw that. I did see a brief post that Derek Lunsford won. So,
Okay, so that's
but
the extent to what you know of.
that's the
Did you see
extent.
Classic at all?
No, I didn't. Who won
Okay.
Classic? I'm
Oh
normally
man, I was
quite good
hoping
at
you would
this.
remember the name. Good at this stuff, really? I don't know about that, Mike.
Or at least keeping up with things.
You're terrible at keeping up with things. That's
I
exactly
know,
the thing you're
everything.
bad at. Man, why can't I remember the German guy's name? He was the German guy that came second to Chris Bumstead at the Olympia.
Michael.
Unbelievable. I thought he was. What did I just say?
Was his name
was?
Michael?
I can't remember.
Oh man, someone who's listening to this is screaming their names.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
it's so...
I should really be able to say. I'm going to find it now, but yeah, he came second to Bumstead at the Olympia. I actually think I'm pretty sure I follow him.
He's got crazy wheels, hasn't he?
I mean, he's crazy everywhere. Oh man, I wish I could quickly know what to exactly search. And actually, no, Classic Arnold winner. Here we go. Oh Jesus Christ! Google has let me down. It's given me the 2019 Brandon Curry won. This is not the results I wanted. Here we go. I've got the Arnold Sports Festival. Here we go. Mike Summerfield. There you go. So not Michael, but Mike. German, I could remember, but I couldn't remember his name for whatever reason. Unreal. Just like the shape he's got is just unbelievable. And yeah, so he came first. Logan Franklin, who you might have heard of.
Yeah, I know Logan. Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't seen him for ages, and he just he was gnarly. Like, he was in very good shape, completely shredded. Mike is just freaky. He is just super wide, and his waist is so narrow. He's just so hard to beat, really, I think.
Did Terence Ruffin compete?
No.
Okay.
So that'll be interesting, but I don't think Terence, unfortunately, because I love Terence, I don't think he'll have the size to take it from Mike, unfortunately. Then third was Matthew Grego, who I didn't really know. I'd seen him before, but I didn't really know. And I think he, to some extent, came out of the blue. I don't think he's placed particularly highly before. Then it was Michael DeBoule, who's been on the circuit for ages. And I don't look at him and look at his physique and think he's super classic. But anyway, then fifth was our man Wesley, who won it last year. So it just goes to show, I don't think Wesley looked worse than last year. I haven't taken a lot of time to compare, so I don't think he looked worse. I just think the competition's leveled up since then.
Gotcha.
And he didn't bring up his lower body sufficiently to place higher. He's just a tall guy, and his quads are unreal. And people are like, "Oh, he's got no legs." It's like, he has really big legs. They're just, his upper body is humongous. I think he has the best arms on stage for sure. He's just a tall guy, and so it's just that kind of symmetry and balance that they want isn't quite there for him. He definitely brought up his glutes, though. You could see that. I know that had been a key area for him. But
so is it more his hamstrings?
Taking it from Samsung. Samsung. Samson.
So yeah, it was really interesting to see Derek to hear that, at least. But But almost kind of harking back to, what was it, the 2002 Arnold Classic when Gunter Schlierkamp beat Ronnie Coleman, and that was like a huge upset.
Mike, you're so in the history. Like,
I know.
jeez.
In 1975.
I wonder if it's going to be a bit of a Jay and Ronnie like back and forth.
Maybe.
Not that, I mean, Ronnie was just like, oh, Jay didn't take it that many times from Ronnie, but it was a good little battle that they had, which was cool. So it's a little bit like the bigger, and I guess Jay and Ronnie were more similar size, whereas Samson is very tall and Derek was a 212, so he's a much shorter individual. But I think it's also interesting to think about why did that happen? Did Samson look any worse? I don't think he really did. I think Derek, having lost the Olympia to Samson, having won the Olympia, was like on the back foot, and so it's like, I wonder how much of that was just like he worked that bit harder, knowing it's like, you know, he was a number two, and like nothing better to drive you forward than to have that taken away from you. So maybe now it will be Samson to do it for the Olympia that's going to be coming in many months' time. But anyway, I won't talk too much on that because you didn't see any of it.
No, but it's still really interesting to talk about it, and it made me think there of. I remember when Ronnie lost to Jay Cutler, and he lost his kind of, you know, his running streak. He said the next year that he felt no pressure at all. Like, so when you're constantly winning and you're on a kind of like a hot streak almost, there's this pressure to keep winning. Whereas when that's gone almost, it's like, oh, the pressure is off you now and you can just, you know, fight. And I think it might depend on who the person is. I definitely think, like you said, Derek had that fire, but I wonder also whether he felt less pressure. Who knows?
Yeah, tough one. I see it both ways. I can see when you've got the streak, you can get complacent because you're just like, I'm just winning. It's a tricky one. Anyway, we should get to questions because we've already been talking half an hour, and I said we'd get to these other questions and not rush them. We have no kind of hard deadline as such. We're not going to be talking for 2 hours or something, but we can go over the hour a little bit. I know someone at least commented being like, yeah, I'm up for longer episodes.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we'll go for a bit longer. So I think I have them all up here. And
Awesome.
so the question I have, Mike, is from, and by the way, thank you for these questions. As a reminder, if you want to send in questions, they are, hopefully you're on Instagram. If you're not, then man, get on Instagram and follow me at Revive Stronger, follow Mike as well. And you can join me via your mobile on my profile. There's the hyperbolic time chamber. Shame on you if you don't know what the hell that means. Look it up and you can join us in Dragon Ball Z land. And in there, I request questions most weeks. If we don't get through all the questions, I might not request them. And like we have this time, just get to them when we can. But without further ado, so Aurora Mattison has asked food choices in building versus cutting phases and minimum recommendations for fruit and veg to lower volume or calories where necessary. I have so many thoughts on that.
So I guess in some respects, and this kind of, for me, this takes us back to our beginning conversations about you and how the food changes. I think to a large extent, I would say the food choices gradually transition. So what might happen is kind of maybe some of the food choices might stay similar, but then maybe you're starting to like say add in a little bit more sauces, for example, or maybe you start to substitute that potato for a bit of rice. So again, kind of fiber doesn't get too out of control. And so you're kind of gradually transitioning depending on the change in your calories. And then typically what I'd say we recommend in terms of, so it says recommendations for fruit, veg to lower food volume. So
minimum recommendations, yeah.
Minimum recommendations. So is that is Aurora trying to ask how much fruit to have, or
so when you're massing and you haven't got much appetite, what's the least amount of fruit and veg we might advise someone to have so they're not missing out on those micronutrients, but they're not feeling like they can't get the calories in?
I would probably say 2 to 3, maybe 2. I'd kind of, that would be my kind of minimum, I would say. But I haven't got any evidence or research to back that up. I think there is a minimum of, like, at least two or three, I would say, because I still think there's easy ways that you can get that in.
For me, I don't like that kind of idea of having a minimum. It kind of,
Mm,
I don't know, it's a bit uncomfortable. It's kind of like, I don't know, fruit and veg are such a cornerstone for health, well-being. They're going to maybe even support like your gut health, and that might support digestion and things. So I struggle to try and like say, like cut it all the way back to here. And it comes to your point, because I immediately, my head goes to how can we keep that high fruit and veg intake but make it easier to get in. So I already named one. I said orange juice. So fruit
mm-hmm.
juices are an option. You still get the micronutrients, even if you're not getting the fiber there always. Then dried fruit. Do you know how easy it is to eat like raisins,
So
dates? So easy, yeah. Then you have things like purees. So I would do like tomato puree a lot of the time. Like it's just 30 grams of that gets you a portion of like the micronutrients of what you'd find in like a tomato. Super easy. You can do garlic puree. There's a variety of different purees, and then you can do smoothies. So that was like a big one for me when I was at that point. I'd just do this massive smoothie in the morning where I'd put in like banana, like just you can put spinach in, all of these different veggies. And also, you mentioned sauces, which can be really palatable, but you can also cook things down massively. So you can use like a tomato base, you can put olive oil in there. You could chuck in olives if you want to. You can chuck in spinach, mushrooms, peppers, onion, like, and it all cooks down to being like barely anything. And that's almost actually similar to like a soup. That's something else I would use. They used to sell these amazing soups, Mike, in Waitrose of all places. I don't know why that's sort of all places, but anyway, it was in Waitrose. It was when we were in Vauxhall, we had a Waitrose really close, and I'd buy these soups when they were on offer because it was you'd get 5 vegetables in this one soup, and it was really palatable. I could just like dip in like, bread and like eat this with, I don't know, some chicken breast, and I'd
mm,
get like just in this little tub basically 5 portions of vegetables. So I think there's so many ways you can make it easy to get in those vegetables and fruits before you need to
mm,
think about pulling them back. Liquid calories
mm,
is like the simplest form there, at least, and
mm.
then make them more palatable.
Super greens, wasn't it?
I can't
Soup
remember.
or something like that. And not only
Might have been.
that, you can use the Ninja Creamy. Buy Ninja Creamy, and you can make fruit ice cream.
You can incorporate fruit into it, yes. So, like, I get a
Yeah,
banana every day through
yeah,
the Ninja Creamy. I thought you were going to say
exactly.
use the Ninja Creamy to make a soup, and I was like, how would you do
Oh no.
that?
No,
But
yeah,
yeah,
you can make.
it's you can do that, and yeah, like you said, in terms of an absolute minimum, quantity does make up for lack of quality. So when you are on a lot of food, you can get away with just the fact you have so much food going in that it doesn't make it's not as important to hit those like essentials like it would be during a diet phase. But based off the research I've done in the past, which is a while ago, I know that kind of 5 fruit and veg a day, that 5 a day kind of rule or recommendation comes from some meta-analyses where they kind of looked at fruit and veg intake and all-cause mortality, and there's basically like almost exponential improvements up to 5, and then
Hmm.
there was just like diminishing return, like it slowly dropped off towards 10, and then once you got to about 10, it kind of plateaued, where if you ate more than 10 fruit and veg, you're not really seeing any further benefit. So I'm always like, if you can get between 5 and 10, you're doing a really, really good job. With like 5, I think for people who take this stuff seriously would be like kind of my minimum. And I'm surprised by how many people who are in our space aren't able to make sure they get 5.
It's so simple, like you said. It's simple, and it's just habits and a slight perspective shift to a certain
Yeah,
degree. It makes
just
me
plan
think.
it.
Yeah, plan it. Literally plan it. Just literally get into a routine of, like you said, make a smoothie as your breakfast. Have some oats or something, or just make a smoothie and have that instead. And like you could literally smash more than 5 fruit a day with a smoothie. It'd be so easy.
Yeah, it's just yeah, taking the time to do it all. And I think unfortunately, at least when I get to that point, when you've got such a quantity of food to get in, you don't want to spend time preparing it. But
Mm,
that's almost not great because when you don't spend time preparing foods, and I would do like frozen vegetables, they're just not nice. Like right now, I could eat a bowl of frozen veg with salt on it, no problem, and so could you. But deep into a mass phase, for me at least, that starts to become real tough. And I'm like, if I don't start thinking about how I'm going to make this a bit more palatable and enjoyable, I'm not going to be able to get it in. So I started buying like frozen veg that was like had like some sort of not marinade, but had some sort of something a bit tastier on it. I even got to the point where I couldn't eat that. I was just like, I can't eat this.
Oh
Then I need to
gosh.
diet a mini cut, and so my appetite picks back up. Anyway, we need to get to more questions because
Yeah.
we already spent 10 minutes on that first one, but I think we answered that one pretty well.
Yeah.
Do you have
Okay.
the next one?
So I do. So Patrick Morris asks how to approach diet and training after a cut when looking to go into an extended period of maintenance. And Ava's just farted.
I don't know if she farted or she breathed. She's stupid, super stinky today, and very needy. Why is she trying to jump up at me? And I'm like, hey, let me do my chat with Mike. Sorry,
Mm.
audience, you don't need to know about needy Ada. So training and diet after a cut, going into extended period of maintenance. I think training doesn't need to look too different. I think you can follow pretty much the same sort of hypertrophy training as you have been doing. I no longer have that sense or need to periodize in like a low volume period. You could. I don't think there's really any downsides. If you wanted to just maintain your physique, you can maintain it with very low volume. Do I think there's a need to do that to resensitize and to put you in a better position to then gain muscle later? No, I don't think that anymore. There was a time I thought that was probably an appropriate thing to do. But so I think your training can look like pretty much as it has been. I don't think, and you can, as ever, we recommend auto-regulating. You might even find, and you probably will find, you can do more volume because your recovery will just start building over time as you've got more food coming in. You'll probably find you can actually adapt and improve a bit faster as well, where you might have plateaued during your diet. And then in terms of the approach to the diet, I think it is just that, like you kind of said, in terms of you make those small swaps as you come out of a diet into a mass phase where it's not suddenly, I was having all like potato for my starchy carbs and now I'm going to all like basmati rice and bread. It's like, no. Maybe you switch one potato meal out for some rice or that sort of thing. And you slowly increase the palatability and that and then the palatability of food, the digestibility, the kind of fiber content, you just transition there. And I think taking it a bit slower is better. So you're better off being like stuffed and so bored of your food and then and making the adjustment versus adjusting too much, making it overwhelmingly palatable and then going over your targets. And in terms of calories and maintenance, some people like to do this reverse diet where they slowly build from like lesser of a deficit towards maintenance. But I just look at what is your new predicted maintenance, and that's important to do it based off your new predicted maintenance, not was your old maintenance is now a surplus, more than likely because you're smaller and you maybe have seen some metabolic adaptation. So what's your new predicted maintenance based off numbers, and move towards that. Hold there for maybe a week or two, let your weight stabilize. We expect to gain an amount of weight that will just be water weight initially and food weight, and just take it nice and slow during that period of time. And eventually you'll get to a point where the body's just kind of happy and it will settle on this. But you might find that maintenance shifts slightly up over time as your, again, metabolism adapts, and you probably find maybe it shifts up by like 5% over a few weeks. That's at least the way I look at this question.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't add any. I haven't got anything to add for that one there.
That's great. We can get to the next question then,
Yay.
Mike, and maybe you can cover this one completely. So we have from Stephen Norshay _PW. Can glute work affect your pelvic tilt? Oh, it's a perfect question for you, Mike. My lower abdominal fat feels more pronounced recently. Could my seated posture have changed? Wow, yeah.
So I don't think so. So I don't think just solely by prioritizing more glute work. I mean, I think a combination of factors, a combination of muscles contribute to, having a pelvic tilt. And equally, there's a structural component and genetic component to pelvic tilt, because if you probably looked at more people with an African descent, they'd probably have a more pronounced anterior pelvic tilt versus, let's just say, Northern Hemisphere. Um, and equally, yes. So, I mean, could your seated posture have changed? Your lower abdominal fat feels more pronounced recently. Could your seated posture have changed? So, I mean, you know, I don't think your abdominal fat would have changed your seated posture and vice versa. I mean, obviously, um, as as your body composition changes, that will change the shape of your body. So, you know, so it's quite possible that your posture hasn't changed, but just as your body comp, maybe that's just altering the shape of it. Ultimately, either way, the bottom line is I wouldn't worry about it. I don't think you need to excessively prioritize more anterior pelvic tilt. Again, pelvic tilt isn't correlated with pain. So, even if your pelvic tilt has changed slightly, that isn't necessarily anything to worry about. So, yeah, that would kind of be my initial immediate thoughts.
I wonder if because I think that's more your warehouse in terms of pelvic tilt and that sort of element of things. I'm just looking at this question in a different, like attacking it from a different angle. I wonder if they're like, I feel like my abdominal fat is more pronounced. Is it because I've gained body fat, or is it because I've changed my seated posture?
Uh,
And so I would look at it as like, is there any other indicators that you've gained body fat around your waistline? And then that's the way I'd look at it. And if there is no other indicators, then maybe it is your seated posture. But I
mm,
imagine, as you said, it probably isn't down to your change, like the way you're sitting. You'll probably look at how a clothes fitting is my waist measurement up. How am I looking in the mirror? Have I gained weight? And those will all be signs. That's at least the way I'd come at it from a different
no, that's
angle.
a really good point. And do you know what? When you come at it from that angle, it kind of makes perfect sense now when you look at the question. So yeah, I think that's a great one. Great point.
Next question.
Yeah. So Caravaglia says, "What might you do differently if you were just Gen Pop, looking for a very aesthetic physique and not necessarily a comp bodybuilder?" I
We've
feel
done
like
this
we've answered
question.
this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know which episode, but look back, it will have already been there. Just be a bit patient, NJ. Or revisit one of those episodes, it will be there. We have answered that question.
Shall I go on to? So the next one is Terry's Africa. Therese AFCR. She asks, what's better for hypertrophy and lol HIPER trophy, hypertrophy, more sorry, what's better for hypertrophy, more volume and far from failure, or less volume and nearer failure, considering recovery is the same?
Now I'm so distracted by you kind of laughing at yourself. For yeah, I saw that and I was like, maybe first language is maybe not English. I don't know, but anyway, it's a easy mistake to make. But you don't see it very often. Actually, you often people seem to get that one. Anyway, regardless, there was an I instead of a Y. If people people didn't get that, more volume and far from failure, or less volume and nearer failure, considering recovery is the same. The brackets considering recovery is the same is an assumption that I don't know if we can say is completely fair, because I think that's something she's saying is like she's heard that been said, that that is the same. And I do think there are many people who kind of do assume that. They're like, I actually can pick the way I train. I can either train closer to failure or to failure and do less volume, or I can train further from failure and do more volume, and they're much of a muchness. And I can see where they're coming from with that, but I don't know that we can say that for sure. There seems to be, and you mentioned this cool word of intersection,
Mm.
where we're training sufficiently hard enough and we're doing enough, and it's like this is the like optimal quote unquote position to be in to generate hypertrophy. We don't know that. And I also personally think there is probably that probably changes over time. So for example, I want to do a post on this, but I need to gather my thoughts, so they're not exactly there. But I think there is a good rationale for periodizing relative intensity. I don't think just having a say 2 RAR is the average relative intensity that is optimal for growth, because you get a really good growth stimulus and you don't generate as much fatigue as less than that. And I think saying on average 2 RAR is a fair statement to make, but there can be reasons to periodize it. It also might be a bit different for some movements versus others. So like I might argue even that like a calf raise at 0 RAR might be the average RAR that's optimal for growth for calves, because the fatigue it produces is so low. But 0 RAR, you might never want to go there for a Romanian deadlift, because suddenly all the tension shifts to your back, more risk of injury, or even like a barbell back squat. Like you don't ever want to fail on a barbell back squat if you can help it. No one aims to fail on that. It's not a great move. So I do think there is room for periodization and like differences in planning. Another point that comes to mind is like coming out of a deload, failure probably isn't the best relative intensity, because you could actually probably get just as much growth from further from failure, and also you're not generating as much muscle damage. Like we know novelty can create muscle damage, and 0 RAR is much more novel than like, or failure is much more novel than leaving more reps in the tank. Excess muscle damage is going to lead to an inability to be able to perform and train a muscle group again and get an effective training response. And so just like you might start out with less volume in that first week, slightly less, because you're not adapted to it, as soon as you've adapted to that level of volume and that relative intensity that's a bit lower, now I think the optimal relative intensity of volume shifts up a little bit. And I think eventually it gets to a point where it's like you're at the optimal, which is kind of what I tried to get to with people, where you're like at that maximal adaptive stimulus, which I'm trying to milk out for as long as possible now in my mesocycle, for example. I think to a point it gets like you get diminishing returns, and it gets to a point where, like I said, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. You kind of want to deload and come out of it, or you get objective performance drop offs. But yeah, where am I trying to come to? So more volume and far from failure, or less volume and nearer failure. I just think why are we putting those up against one another? They could be combined, and I think that's probably the best approach. So to some extent, at least, I think volume is the dose. So it's like, how much of that dose do we need at particular times, more or less, and how's your recoverability? And then you want to get close enough to failure at all times when you're trying to not recover like a deload. So you always want to meet at least a proximity to failure. And then we want to look to kind of stay above that threshold for as long as we can, recognizing we're also adaptable humans, where I think there is probably the ability to adapt, where yes, 0 RAR acutely is going to cause more fatigue and disruption, but if you've gone close to failure over and over time, you're adapting to it just like you are to volume, and so you can deal with it. So you're not getting that excessive fatigue and excessive damage like you've done it, Mike, where you've had multiple weeks at training at your like all out basically. Initially it's like whoa, and then the next week you're like, oh no, I can keep doing this, and actually I can keep improving a little bit. But I think people have problems when they go immediately to that, or if they try and push above that by adding much more volume or what have you. So yeah, I think I like a periodization of relative intensity and volume for those reasons. And I don't know if that made sense, but in my head,
It
to
did.
some extent it did.
It did. And I guess, like, in some way summarizing that, it's like, hey, the body can adapt to almost anything, but it needs a bit of time to adapt. And I think that adaptation process helps with longevity, because again, the longer we can milk out a stimulus, surely that's better than kind of short term, burn twice as bright, but for half as long type thing. So I think there's that element for Terry's to consider. But like, I think the other thing to consider as well as adapting is just knowing that, like you said, don't try and play intensity and volume off one another. See them as levers that you can pull on depending on what's going on in your life. Because also, if you're at a time in your life where time is scarce, okay, well, maybe you can pull a bit more on the intensity lever, but a little bit less volume. So maybe that's a bit more time efficient. Whereas actually, if you've got more time at your disposal at the moment, because maybe you don't have as much family constraints or whoever or whatever, then hey, you can afford to, and you enjoy, maybe because some people enjoy doing a bit more volume, then hey, you can pull on the lever volume a bit more. Or maybe you just find yourself in your own natural sweet spot. And then if you combine that with just what you said, Steve, about giving yourself time to adapt, then that's probably a good answer. But it's all tools. It's all kind of, finding your own middle ground rather than black and white, I think.
For sure. Yeah, I would feel bad because I didn't give like a complete answer. Mike, we need to get you a ring light so you
I
can
know.
have it appropriately lit, and you can have the nice aesthetics. We'll get that sorted. I don't know why I said we'll get that sorted. You'll get that sorted. But if you need help, I'm
New
here.
house.
Anyway, yeah, of course. Yeah, you probably want to wait till then. Just taking this question at face value, though, if someone was to say, like, force me into a corner for an answer that was not so nuanced and not as black and white, I would prefer someone do less and train harder than train less hard and do more. I just find it time and time again that, again, you need to meet that requisite intensity and then you can dial it up via volume. And I think that requisite intensity is anywhere from like 3 to failure, basically. But so often, if someone is doing more volume, they're not even meeting that 3 RAR necessarily, and they are leaving way too much on the table because they've just got such a volume of work to do. So I don't know if you have that same perspective.
I do really, and kind of as you were saying that, it makes me immediately think of quality versus quantity, and I think I don't. It doesn't matter how good one person is, but like say if you had 10 sets of leg press or whatever, at some point you're kind of mentally like tapping out a little bit and you're not in the set. And I think even though we probably couldn't study that, I still think there is something important about that, about being mentally focused, being really kind of locked in and mindful about going hard. Whereas at some point you will mentally tap out. So yeah, and so it kind of aligns with what you were saying, Steve.
It makes me think of, I don't know if I heard this analogy recently or if I'm pulling this one out my arse somehow, but if you have like 3 bullets and you need to hit a target, like you're going to use a sniper and just like you're going to take care of each of those and really make sure you hit the target. Whereas if you have like a machine gun worth of bullets, you just fire everywhere. It's just such an inefficient way to get the job done, and you're expending way more energy. And you maybe have hit the target, you maybe not, but it's just maybe not as efficient a route to go down. Man, I don't know if that I haven't thought that analogy out enough, but that's where I'm at with it. Shall I ask the last question?
Yeah, let's do it.
So this one is from Andrew Stanworth, a nice easy name,
Hey.
as opposed to some of the other names some of them were easy. Anyway, regardless. Is there a maximum time you would spend in a cutting phase outside of contest prep?
Ooh, interesting. I think a specific number doesn't come to mind. It's more a case of coming back to what we said at the beginning of, have we gotten to the point where the juice is worth the squeeze? And it might be that along that way. So it's more a case of, rather than defining a maximum time, it's first knowing what is the goal that we're working towards, i.e., whether that's a look, a body comp goal, an aesthetic, or a weight scale, or a bit of both. And then obviously you can do things that then, we then sort of set a rate of loss and so on. And it might be that we have breaks along the way, in terms of diet breaks, refeed days, maintenance periods. And I might be contradicting myself there. So I wouldn't necessarily set a maximum period of time. I would more go off like, right, how are we progressing? What's the feedback from the client in terms of, diet fatigue markers, etc. And then I would use that to then put in an appropriate strategy, because it would probably, a maximum time would vary, and I probably wouldn't have a cutoff because it would just totally be context dependent.
Yeah, I don't think this is, I agree with you. I don't think this is like a minimum amount of protein to maximize hypertrophy or a minimum amount of fat to maximize hormone health and get sufficient micronutrients and essential fatty acids. This is it really depends on how does that scenario look, like how does that diet look. And I can theorize, like if you're losing at this rate for this long, like on paper, once people have lost this amount of body weight, they see this aggressive adaptation, and then the juice isn't worth the squeeze. An often common figure is like 10% of your body weight. And once you've lost that amount, people tend to adapt much harder, and the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Diet fatigue is quite elevated. So if that's 10%, maybe that's 20 weeks. And then over 20 weeks, it's like, man, you're losing at 0.5% a week. Is it really worth it? Maybe, maybe not. But ultimately, it comes down to the same question of like, is there a maximum length of a mesocycle? No. Like, we don't have an arbitrary deload, like accumulation to deload paradigm or number of weeks of hard training to backing off. You auto-regulate it, just like you said there, Mike. Just like you auto-regulate your training, you look at the accumulation of fatigue, you look at performance, how's the person's sleep, niggles, injuries, how's the motivation to train. Same here. Like, the performance is how is the scale weight dropping, or how is like their body comp changing, and then how are they feeling about it? Are they motivated? Are they driven? Is like hunger and energy levels still good? Like, there's no hard rule here. But I have had it with clients where we've been dieting for a while and we're just not really moving forward. And I'm like, even though we're not actually in a calorie deficit because you're not losing weight at this point, it happens for people. Just the idea that they are not achieving their goal and they think they're dieting, like they're in a diet mindset, kills them. So then, like, I will stop the diet there. But that's the same thing with auto-regulating. I look at, again, what the objective marker's saying in terms of like fat loss, things moving in the right direction, maintenance of performance, and then how are they feeling about it? Because you could auto-regulate it just based off that. So you can have a blueprint in place. Like, you might think, oh, they probably need a deload after 8 weeks of training, but you then look at in that 7th, 8th week or earlier in the mesocycle, like how they're going in real time. So yeah, I'm on the same page.
Yeah, really. And it almost reminded me of a study that I remember reading from Bill Campbell about fat loss plateaus, and there was some research done into, I think it was like a mathematical algorithm, because they wanted to understand if weight plateaus really do occur. And I think they ran an algorithm, and it was on obese people, and the participants were overweight, should I say. And what I think they found is that in people who were overweight, if they were in a calorie deficit, that actually weight loss plateaus don't occur for like 2 or 3 years, and it's actually more they weren't accurate with their nutrition, or they were underestimating or overestimating what they were actually eating. So I can't remember the exact point, but I think the thing that triggered it was actually, providing you're in a calorie deficit, and again, it's a sliding scale because it will change. Actually, weight loss can potentially occur for a long time, but it depends on the person, their starting point, and where they're going, and all of those other factors.
Sorry, Ada's just decided to absolutely lose her head. I don't know why. The only, sorry, I think that's a great point. And actually, I remember the study that you're talking about, as in, I remember, now you've talked about it, I don't know the author or anything like that. But the only additional point I want to make is because you mentioned contest prep. And so I will just mention that I don't want people to get much lighter than about 10% above their stage weight. And rather than, like, that could be a number you can use, but you can base it off that individual's lower intervention point. So just like in a recovery phase, we try and get up to that lower intervention point and kind of then start your off season in a 6 to 10 week period, which again, those are numbers, but don't hold us to that. Like, that can look different person to person. A lot of people end up overshooting that, which is understandable too. But again, I wouldn't want someone to diet down lower than that, because they're going to have to just recover out of it. So that's the only additional bit of context. Like, don't get someone like stage ready in an off season when they're not competing. No. So yeah, you can get down. And again, another number might be like low teens of body fat, 10% body fat. Like, you can see clear abs, maybe a few striations, muscle separation. Don't get leaner than that, because it's just like, now you're going to have to recover from it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think maybe that's a game where the coach steps in and just says like, hey, come on, maybe the weight number or the potential goal or outcome the client has in the head is just maybe not appropriate or it's not ideal. And so again, that's maybe where the coach has to step in and just say like, hey, I know you probably like this, but again, it's not what we're looking to achieve. It's not conducive to our overall goal of getting you looking at your best or in a good place.
Excellent. We covered all the questions,
Hey,
so we can get some new ones for next week. And I do want to say, as a reminder, guys, we are coaches ourselves. That is what Revive Stronger does. If you aren't aware of that, both me and Mike coach. And so we love helping people in all these different scenarios get through things. So, yeah, we've been coaching a long time, have a lot of experience. And one of the things we really pride ourselves on, if you haven't heard me talk this spiel before at Revive Stronger, is our ability to communicate with our clients. Something that not many coaching services that I'm aware of do is allow their clients to speak to them, whether or not that's a voice note, whether or not we get most of our clients to record like a video diary. So they literally record themselves talking to their phone and then send that across. And it just gives them that extra ability to ask questions, to really open up and think deeply about their training and programming. And also allows for no miscommunication too, because sometimes people can sound a certain way via an email and you interpret it incorrectly, and then we give them a video response back. And yes, it does mean we can't work with as many clients, and that's fine, because this is the way we view coaching to be, where you can actually communicate, and yeah, we get tremendous results that way. So if you are interested in getting some help from myself or Mike, Ryan as well on the team, you can apply. That'll be linked in the description as always. But otherwise, thank you very much as always for listening. If you made it this far, you definitely should be subscribed. Leave us a nice comment and a thumbs up, and we appreciate you. Anything else you want to say, Mike?
I will spare you the outro music.
No, we need the outro now. Oh. No, it's fine. We actually have outro music on this.
Oh,
I have actually created outro music, so it's the same as the Revive Stronger podcast outro music, but we have it there.
Oh, well, I'll definitely doubly save you the outro music.
Yeah.
But no, appreciate you guys. Drop us a comment and look forward to catching you guys in the next episode.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.